We got a lot to catch up on the Illini basketball offseason. Isaac Trotter, 24/7 Sports college basketball writer. You can read his stuff now, too, at cbssports.com. Big time Isaac Trotter. But we got a lot to catch up on. Feels like 3 weeks ago was the last time you were on with us, and a lot has happened with Illinois basketball since then.
Yeah, nothing ever is a dull day in the college basketball offseason as the portal. I think we're over 1,700 names. Now it's finally felt like a lot of guys were waiting to commit early in the cycle and, waiting for those last NIL checks, trying to figure out like if they can raise their value a little bit more by waiting. And then boom, a flurry of commitments come in. And it's just like boom, boom, boom. This weekend, it felt like my phone was just blowing up. It was like 20 commitments. It felt like in one single day. So it's fun. And I feel like Illinois is definitely in the center of it all because they have as much work to do as basically anybody in college basketball, both on the coaching side and the roster building side and the NBA side. It's just like, it just never ends.
I'm going to ask you about the winners and losers in the Big Ten so far in the transfer portal. So that's going to be a fun conversation. And let's be honest, like for guys like us who are content creators, this is good for us. Like we get to talk about all these things. Fans, I think some of them enjoy this, but others do not. Isaac, with Illinois potentially only returning 3 guys, maybe from last year's team. But as you zoom out, like how have you kind of, I guess, reacted to, how have you kind of found your bearings in this new college basketball world? Because it is pretty insane what the transfer rules, basically no transfer rules anymore, and what NIL has done to college basketball.
It's sink or swim. It's like guys are entering the portal, watch the tape, try to get a decent feel for what their game is if you haven't really watched a ton of them during the regular season, and then go from there because it feels just like everything changes. Yesterday, Travis Branham and I are trying to figure out like, wait, can grad transfers enter after May 1st again? Like you go on the NCAA website, some say they do, some say they can't. Compliance people were wrong about it. Like, it's just like, it feels like the rules change constantly. And that's a big deal because, if you have to enter the portal by May 1st, even for graduate students, that completely changes the game. Because remember, Cam Spencer became available very late in the process last cycle. And that was a big game changer. And so, you look at Illinois too, like Coleman Hawkins, if he wanted to enter the portal, it'd have to be by May 1st, which is next week. So it feels like the ripple effects of all of these rule changes, it's hard to keep up on. It just is. And then you throw in all of these guys going in, all of the roster spots open. So I feel like I have like 17 tabs on my laptop open at all times, just because that's kind of what you have to try to keep on top of it.
Yeah, I'm counting on guys like you to tell me who's going to be good in the Big Ten and in college basketball this year, because it's like, who's on what team? We got to figure this all out. So we'll figure that all out. But let's focus on Illinois here to start, Isaac. Orlando Antigua is back in Champaign. You were here. You saw what Orlando did for this program. What do you think is the impact of Orlando Antigua, both short-term and long-term, for Illinois basketball?
It's a really big deal. I remember when that job opening came open and I'm like thinking of names, and I was like the Iowa State assistant or maybe the Rutgers assistant that's rising, who just got paid. I think he got $700,000 after getting Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper to go to Rutgers. And then I was thinking of some of the Duke guys. Jay Lucas is a kind of a rising one. And then someone was like, you're overthinking this one. You're just really overthinking it. And Orlando Antigua makes a ton of sense. And now you kind of look at this roster or this coaching staff. It's like, it's a nice little mix here because you have Tim Anderson and Orlando Antigua, who pound for pound as good recruiters as you'll find in college basketball. And then you have like the next group of the Tyler Underwoods, like the Zach Hammers of the world. Like they're just film nerds who are just like constantly trying to tweak the X's and O's and how are we maximizing this roster? And it's like Brad is like the CEO on top of it all. And you could go down the list. That's a really, really good staff compared to what other teams have, not only in the Big Ten, but also moving forward. Now, just think that Orlando Antigua can take you to that next level. And, every time that like a move gets made in the coaching carousel this cycle, especially from the head coaching ranks, but also from the assistants, it's like, who you bringing with you? Because as of now in college basketball, it's not just yourself anymore in this free agency period. It's you and who can you bring in the immediate future. And I think Mark Pope is trying to figure that out at Kentucky. And now we're trying to figure out what that means for Illinois and Orlando Antigua, because if it's not just Orlando Antigua, it's Orlando Antigua and a couple guys that he's really close with. I think it really changes the complexion of your roster and what you can do right away.
We know Orlando Antigua is getting a bunch of one and dones at Kentucky, getting a lot of elite talent to Kentucky, getting Kofi Coburn, Andres Felice, guys like that, Andre Curbelo to Illinois. What do you think of Antigua in the transfer portal? Is he still that level of recruiter? Does that does he still have the same impact in the transfer portal era?
I do. I just feel like it's just relationships, and that stuff matters so much more. And especially like those guys that have connections everywhere, like Orlando Antigua has so many connections throughout the country. That all plays. And we've talked so much about like the Dominican national team that he has those ties with. It's just basically a talent fodder throughout. And, East Coast, he can recruit that, but we've seen him recruit down in Florida really well. Like you've seen him recruit basically the entire country. And I think when you head into the portal, a lot of these guys are hitting the portal being like overwhelmed because their phone just blows up if you're one of the top guys, or even honestly, one of the top 200 guys, your phone just blows up. And I think a lot of times it's just like, well, who do I know? Who am I comfortable with? And I feel like that can kind of change the game plan for you. So if you're Orlando Antigua and you come into this Illinois roster, and Illinois has a war chest, right, of resources. So he's not going out on the recruiting trail trying to swing up like he was, I think, early in the process at Illinois. I feel like the sell for him has changed. I think that's a really big reason why he's back, because I don't think he would come back here if he didn't feel like he had a puncher's chance to literally go get any recruit in the country.
Luke Goody enters the transfer portal, and you've seen now a couple guys that are fan favorites for the Illini fans. Dane Danjo, Luke Goody made big plays in the NCAA tournament. Amani Hansberry was a guy that we thought could get to the next level. Sincere Harris obviously had an impact as a freshman, and Amani getting to the next level, I just mean as a player in college basketball. So all those guys are gone, and there's only 3 possible returnees, barring Marcus Damas getting a waiver here. Are you concerned about continuity? Should Illini fans care about continuity?
Continuity matters. I think it definitely does. I mean, we saw Marquette last year with their continuity, what they were able to do. Purdue had one of the highest continuity rates in college basketball and make it all the way to the national championship game. Like FAU had a bunch of continuity and it didn't necessarily work out the same way. So it's not foolproof, but I just feel like it does matter. But I think it's interesting how some of these coaches, like when they do have a lot of continuity in the offseason, they're like, yeah, continuity, big deal for us. It's great to have all our guys back. And then when it's different and you're in a different boat, it's like, well, continuity doesn't necessarily matter all that much. So you see the twists and the turns, the message pumping as it goes compared to your roster. But I do think it's one of those situations where you're a big boy program now. This is what happens. Like Kentucky has to reload its roster every year. Even, not necessarily blue blood teams, but like Florida is a good example of a team that they didn't have a ton of retention last year. They went onto the portal. They had to go get multiple different pieces. They were kind of building from scratch around just a couple guys, Will Richard, and then Riley Kugel, who honestly had a really bad year and entered the transfer portal. But all of the newcomers hit, and they're, one of the better teams in the SEC. They make the NCAA tournament. They're one miracle shot away from potentially making a real run in the NCAA tournament. So I feel like it's basically you can find examples for anything. You can find examples that show you that retention absolutely matters. You go far. You can find examples where, hey, retention doesn't necessarily matter that much. Like Utah State last year, one of the lowest retention rates in college basketball, and they win the Mountain West with a brand new roster. So you can find those different examples, but I do think it just comes down to your talent acquisition, like how you're building your roster and how you get it to mesh. And sometimes that just is all it is, right? And I think for Illinois, they're kind of testing that theory of like, all right, how much talent do we really have to bring in to give ourselves a real legit chance to win the Big Ten in a year where we're losing Terrence Shannon and Coleman Hawkins? And in the past, that would be like, a death sentence for your Big Ten championship hopes.
I just think it's clear Brad Underwood is prioritizing talent overall. Like, well, he was asked about culture, keeping the culture yesterday, said, I am the culture. Like that is my job. So while I think Ty Rodgers would be a guy I want on the team. Like I get he's going more towards offense. How does Ty Rodgers fit in all that? I like that guy that's been a part of winning, knows how to do those things. But it's also incumbent on Brad. If he wants to win a national championship, which he is talking about, Isaac, you have to get elite talent. And the guys we're talking about leaving probably aren't elite talents. They're good. They make good contributions, but now it's on Brad to upgrade on those things. And I think he's going to do that in the portal. But man, if you go away from guys who have helped you and have been a part of it, you definitely have to find talent upgrades and guys who aren't going to be problems in the locker room.
No doubt. I mean, if you look at the recent history of national champions, you have to have NBA draft picks, right? Like that's a staple of it. And you saw UConn this past season. I mean, they got 5 guys who are going to get drafted. So talent reigns supreme, and then it kind of comes into those other matters of how you kind of cover up those gaps. But like the Ty Rodgers conversation is fascinating because like I've been thinking a lot about like roster overlap and like what type of roster you're building and how you can maximize it with guys that don't have a lot of those similar skill sets. Like, that's why it made sense for me for Luke Goody to leave, just because I feel like Illinois is pushing for certain guys that do a lot of the things he does well. Ty Rodgers kind of checks off a lot of boxes that this roster doesn't have. Like, he's a really, really good offensive rebounder. There's not a ton of proven elite offensive rebounders on this team. Like, he is a really, really good wing defender, I think. We haven't really gotten to see that because he had to guard so many smalls last year, but I think you could see him being an elite wing defender. You don't have that on the roster right now. Like, I think those intangibles of like getting loose balls and playing hard and understanding your role and attacking the rim, putting rim pressure, like, those are all different things that Ty brings to the table that you don't have on this roster right now. So moving forward, I think keeping Ty Rodgers should be a major, major priority, because I just feel like he can play with everybody. And maybe it's 15 minutes, maybe it's 30, but like, I just feel like that's a dude that you need to have on your roster because he does so many things well that a lot of the guys that they currently have in the mix don't.
Totally agreed. I want Ty Rodgers on my team. Luke Goody's got a market, though. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Indiana obviously getting him in on campus this weekend for a visit. I think he'll be there Thursday and Friday, according to Rabbi over at Indiana 247, who does a great job.
That's juicy. That's juicy, Isaac.
Well, it is. And here's the interesting part about it. Like, when you kind of look at what Indiana's done in the portal, they have gone after shooters. Connor Hickman, a transfer out of Bradley, went there and went on a visit, and he passed on them. He went to Cincinnati because the flux for minutes there is very interesting. So it's fascinating to me that Luke Goody is looking at that one as a potential place where he can go play, because there's a lot of guys there. Like, they have Miles Rice, they have Cannon Carlisle, they have Mackenzie McBacco. They're going to play Malik Renew at the 4. They have Bryson Tucker in there. Like, it's a lot of guys. So there's no legit path for him to automatically start. And I don't know if there's a legit path for him to get 22 to 25 minutes a night, but he fills such a big need for them. So I feel like he is going to corkscrew his way into that rotation somehow. But it's fascinating because shooting in this portal cycle has really ramped up as becoming, honestly, the most sought after asset. And that's why Goody's market is going to be really, really important. And if he didn't think he was going to get the playing time at Illinois or the financial backing at Illinois, like, he's going to get that somewhere else. I don't think he's a dude that's going to drop down to a Mountain West or like go to the A-10 and play, or George Mason or whatever. Like, he's going to have a market because so many teams in the Big Ten need shooting. So many teams nationally need shooting. And like, we're seeing dude like Kobe Brea has like his pick of the litter from the 5 biggest programs in college basketball right now, because he shot 50% from 3. Like, and Goody shot 56%, I think, on open catch and shoot threes last year. Like, people want him. People will want him.
All right, so Illinois needs to upgrade if they want to, make up for that. And this guy I like, it, Ben Humrickhouse from Evansville, spent his first 3 years at the NAIA level at Huntington. He's going to visit campus here pretty shortly, we believe. What do you think of the fit for Ben Humrickhouse and his market?
Done a lot more work on him lately. I really like his game. I think you see the size, you see the shooting, and you're like, okay, he's a shooter. I think there's a lot more to his game than just shooting. And so I think Luke Goody leaving is pretty interesting to me and kind of has my attention peaked a little bit, because I think if you're looking at a Goody for Humrickhouse trade, I think if you have just 1 year, you're probably picking Humrickhouse because he can do a little bit more off the bounce. Some of the pick and roll stuff that he was able to do last year at Evansville kind of was like, oh, okay, this is not just a spot up guy. Like, his decision making off of those pick and rolls, he had some splashes of nice passing, nice vision of the floor. He's so big, you can kind of get to that little floater in the middle of the paint too. So he's a good player. I think he's an additive player as well. I think there's some questions about him defensively. So I went back and watched like multiple of their games. And against Drake, he guarded Tucker DeVries, who's like their star. And Tucker DeVries did what he wanted to do, right, in that game. That's how that works. But then there were other games where you saw Humrickhouse guard smalls. So that was kind of interesting to me. They were not just putting him on like big wings or 4s. Like, he was able to chase around some shooters as well. Maybe that's easier because shooters know how to guard shooters, because that's just what they do on the offensive end. So I think he's a lot more than just a one-trick pony. And I think if you're going to come in and you're like looking to prioritize, or let's just be honest, you're looking to upgrade over Luke Goody, Humrickhouse kind of fits a lot of those things, because Goody was a very good stationary catch and shoot guy. You could see him hit a couple 1-dribble pull-ups. Offensive rebounding was really good. And then it's like, I feel like, what else are you getting from him off the bounce? Humrickhouse, I think, has proven that he can do a little bit more off the bounce and be a knockdown shooter, both off the catch and off the dribble.
He's likely a 4 if Illinois is able to land him. Like they're battling Louisville and some other programs for him. Villanova is in on there. But if they're able to land him, you still would just have a front court of Humrickhouse, Merez Johnson, Kerry Booth. There's some talent there, but feels like they need a big man. What kind of big man transfer do you think they need?
Yeah, I think it's someone who's just taking away the rim, just an elite rim protector. And there's some good ones out there. Felix Okpara from Ohio State. The stat that I had with him is team shot just 53% at the rim against Ohio State when Okpara was on the floor. Like that plays. Now, it wasn't always super consistent, but the numbers are the numbers. Like he's a very good rim protector, but limited a little bit offensively. And so like that's kind of the price you pay, I think, right now in this market. Ugana Nyenso, the next one that's been the big name that entered the transfer portal as well. You look at it. 52% at the rim when he was on the floor. Like teams are just not getting easy buckets at the rim when he's on the floor. Now, when he sat, team shot 62% against Kentucky at the rim. So it's just like, it's a pretty marked difference there. So I feel like when you just look at what this roster has, I think for Merez, you're kind of expecting him to be a high energy rebounder, run the floor. You know, his free throw form kind of caught my eye this summer watching some of his games. Like he's got a little bit more skill to him, but you kind of expect that junkyard dog a little bit. You know, with Kerry Booth, it's like those catch and shoot threes, those straight line drives. With Humrickhouse, it's like the threes, the off the dribble stuff. You just need something different. Again, we're talking about no overlap with your roster. How do you find a big man that just brings you something different? I think you just want to have that guy who potentially could guard big men one-on-one, but also just as an elite drop coverage defender, because you look at Kylan Boswell's skill set. He played a lot of drop coverage last year at Arizona. I think that could potentially be, you know, an interesting strategy there to use, where you could pair Boswell with his elite ball pressure, who can really, you know, hedge over and contest those tough twos, along with an elite rim protector. That feels like a really, really nice match for what this roster is building.
Coleman Hawkins, you mentioned him previously, said he's 100% all in on the NBA draft. He declares for the draft. What do you think of his NBA potential? What's the path to an NBA roster look like for him?
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? Like Sam Vecini, I think, had him in the 80s in the NBA draft, and that felt a little bit lower than I think what Coleman Hawkins expected. And, you know, I would expect him to go through the NBA combine. We'll see how that works. But he just kind of strikes all the right notes of a guy who would like maybe like slip under the cracks a little bit, but finds a way to stick on a roster somehow. Just look at his bloodlines, just look at what his ability to do with the ball in his hands. You know, the shooting numbers have been much improved. His decision-making, I think, got a little bit better. Probably going to be able to maximize him defensively when you're not asking him to go guard like Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic or even Ibaka Zubac in the NBA playoffs. But I just feel like he's one of those pieces where, you know, maybe it isn't a two-way. Maybe we'll see. We'll see how that market develops. I'm going to take him at his word that 100% on the NBA draft. I still wonder if there is a part of him that looks at like that fifth year of college basketball as like a place where I could really go maximize my value. And this is college basketball these days. Everybody who enters the NBA draft is still like a potential free agent. So I'd be fascinated to see if he also tosses his name in the portal or decides maybe, hey, like to think seriously about potentially coming back to Illinois. Illinois doesn't seem like they're building around him, but it just wouldn't surprise me at all if he threw his name in the portal just to give himself a second option, just to see what that type of money is, just to cover your bases. It feels almost like dumb not to, just because the numbers that are getting thrown around are stupid.
Yeah, Kofi did a couple years ago. I wouldn't be able to blame Coleman if he did that, but I'll take him at his word. He's usually been pretty, sticks to his word, which I've always appreciated about Coleman. All right, let's get to, before we let you go, Isaac, let's go to the winners and losers so far of the Big Ten's transfer portal. Who are your top 3 winners of the portal so far in the Big Ten?
Okay, so we have to remember the league is bigger now, right? Like we got a lot more teams now going in with UCLA.
It's still taking me time. Like when I see UCLA in the transfer portal, I got to mention them. I don't know what their roster looks like, but I got to mention them in the Big Ten now.
So there's a lot going on. Let's start positive wise. Let's go with Indiana. So that's been a very hot button topic, right? Like everyone's like, oh, Indiana's the number one recruiting class or portal class. I think a lot of people look at Indiana and go, well, are they going to make any threes? When I dug into them, like they played big last year. Did you know they were terrible on the glass? Like they were terrible on the glass. Like how are you playing 2 big men and being that bad on the glass? Did you know that their pick and roll offense was atrocious last year as well? Like So it's more than just 3-point shooting. Like I think that we have to focus on. And I think when you look at the additions that they have, Miles Rice is one of the best pick and roll scorers in college basketball last year. That's going to fix a big problem. Oumar Ballo, for his issues that he has, which are legit, like he only plays one defensive coverage. I think that teams went after them in Arizona last year, trying to get threes off of them against that coverage. But for all of those weaknesses that he potentially has in his game, he is a phenomenal rebounder. And so I think when you can check off those two boxes there, that raises the floor of what this roster could be, because there's still talent there, but they were not very good in the margins. And I think if your pick and roll offense gets better with Miles Rice, your rebounding and rim pressure gets better with Oumar Ballo, that gives you a chance. And then Cannon Carlisle is fascinating, because if you watch his tape, it's like great move off the bounce, breaks somebody down, gets in the paint, jumper, brick. And it's like, oh, and then another one, great move. Wow, his first step is just electric. No one could stay in front of him. Jumper, brick. And it's like, that's just kind of how it works with him. And if he could just refine his game a little bit, he's really talented and can be a really, really talented piece. So I like the gamble there. So they're a winner for me.
Yeah, I think they have to be a winner just because they're one of the most talented teams. My question remains, is the roster constructed the right way? Like, can Renew and Ballo, can that be an effective offense when you have those two? Like, I think there's a lot of pressure on Mbako to continue to shoot incredibly well. I think he could be an all Big Ten first team kind of player, but there's a lot of pressure on him. You still need to add some shooting. So I think Indiana is an NCAA tournament team, but it's just, I don't know if Ballo would have been my top overall target for them because of what they have with Renew and Mbako. I thought those two at the 4 and the 5 would have been great for them, but Oumar Ballo is a really productive player and a dominant guy in the paint. So I get it. And I know Woodson likes that, but you still got to surround him with some shooters.
Well, that's why I think the Goody, target is interesting to me too, because they were very big on playing two bigs at all times last year. It wasn't just when Kel'el Ware and Malik Renew was on the floor. It was literally like all times. Anthony Walker's checking in and they're playing two bigs. Peyton Sparks is checking in and we're playing two bigs. Could that be different this year, where it's like, hey, when Renew checks out for those 12 minutes, are we shifting Goody to the 4 with Mbako at the 3, and then we have Ballo at the 5? Like, when Ballo needs a break, because he got into foul trouble a lot at times last year, he's not a guy that I don't think is going to play 37 minutes a night. Are we shifting Renew to the 5, Mbako to the 4? Let's get another 3 on the floor. Maybe that's Bryson Tucker. Maybe that's Luke Goody. I feel like those rotations there where they can try to maybe avoid some of the clunkiness, where you only maybe have 10 to 12 minutes where you're having Renew and Ballo on the floor together, and then those other 28, maybe a little bit more maximized. But, Woody has to really, this is a big year for him. And I think he has to really hit these rotations really hard. But think about the conversation about what Indiana would be if they hadn't added these guys. We'd be crushing him. Mm-hmm. Just absolutely crushing him. You're going to run it back with this crew after what happened last year. You're losing Kel'el Ware to the NBA draft. You're going to run it back with Gabe Cupps as your starting point guard. Like, we'd have way different conversations about them, and they have given themselves a chance. And that's all you really need right now in the portal.
Yeah, I really like Miles Rice. He stood out when I was in Omaha in the NCAA tournament. All right, 2 other winners in the Big Ten. Who you got?
I like what Maryland has done, too. Yet another offseason where I will be bullish on Maryland. We'll see how this goes after last year. But Selton Miguel is a really nice transfer out of USF. Big, strong, knocked down some threes. Yeah, Jacoby Gillespie out of Belmont. It's interesting. His numbers analytically are fantastic. I'm still hesitant on if they're going to translate to the Big Ten, but a small guard like that shooting over 70% at the rim, I was like, ooh, that's kind of interesting. They went out into the portal. They got Rodney Rice, brought him back. Tafari Gapare, they brought him in to add some more front court depth. They get Julian Reese back, which is a big part of the transfer portal winners, because he could have easily entered the portal and been part of that. So I'm kind of throwing him in their transfer portal hall, so to speak. And it just makes a little bit more sense where you've added shooters, you've added that point guard to help Jameer Young's replacement. And, I was really concerned that they were going to run in and be like, hey, Jacoby Gillespie, you have to basically handle everything to be the Jameer Young 2.0. And they haven't done that. They have Deshaun Harris-Smith coming back. They have some of the guards that they brought in. It's not just on one guy to potentially do this thing. And then they also added Derek Queen, a 5-star big man. So the 2 big lineups are going to be in the Big Ten next year in Indiana and Maryland, but I like the supporting cast that they've done there. And then my last winner is Michigan. I love what Michigan has done so far. I think that if I was Ohio State, I'm looking at what Dusty May and his roster has put together, and I'm like, wait, we didn't hire that guy? Like, that's a little bit frustrating to me, because they've gone in the portal and just done terrific work. Roddy Gale, I think, is one of the most underrated players in the portal. I've been a big fan of his. I think he's going to be a good player. Trey Donaldson, he was on my list of like most improved players of college basketball last year out of Auburn. He's going to be a good player for them. Danny Wolf, familiar name there. Just expect him to be, kind of a plug and play 20 to 25 minutes a game with just a great skill. Sam Walters, big time shooter out of Alabama, former top recruit. Reuben Jones, North Texas transfer, just a dog defensively. You just see that it just fits together really, really well. And they still haven't added Vlad Golden, who I think a lot of people expect that's the next domino for them. Maybe they're one guard short. Like we when he took that job, Dusty May took that job, it's like, all right, they're getting Nelly Davis there. That hasn't really matriculated. Elijah Martin, they thought maybe he could potentially be a piece there, but he decided he didn't want to play with Elijah or with Janelle Davis, and he's going to stick to Florida. So they didn't necessarily get all of the FAU haul that they potentially somewhere, predicting right when he first took that job. But I still just really am a big fan of what the roster they put together. It's a mix of old and young and here and now and future. It's high upside. It's skill. It's just smart. And this roster just looks so much better than what Juwan Howard was working with last year.
I'm with you not having Illinois here on yet because Kylan Boswell, Ty Rogers, Trey White, Merez Johnson, Kerry Booth. That's who Bart Torvik has as your top 5 contributors. You need more. So they need more. Nebraska, though, is a team. I like what Fred does in the portal, man.
I agree. Though I'm kind of waiting on Nebraska just to see what Rink Mass' decision is. That's just the last piece there. I think they would definitely be a top 3 team in the offseason winners and losers in the Big Ten if they get Mass back. I like Raleigh Worcester out of Utah, but I wouldn't say he's the most talented point guard in the Big Ten next year. So we'll see how that makes. I already know that you're going to make some Sam Griesel comps with him once you get a few more games under his belt. But yeah, for Illinois, the reason they're not in the top 3 is I just feel like they have big moves left to make, and they. Kylan Boswell is probably, if he's your second best transfer portal addition, that's a really, really good thing. So we'll see how that matriculates. I just feel like they have a couple big swings left in the tank, and it's hard to judge them right now when they have, so many open scholarships.
Totally agree. All right, your top 3 losers in the portal so far in the Big Ten. I can guess one of them.
Yeah, you can guess 2 of them, I think, too. Wisconsin is obviously a pretty big loser. AJ Storr, Chucky Hepburn, those are really big losses. I think just with the talent that they had last year, I think that they're going to look back at that team and feel it as a very big missed opportunity because you didn't get the banner in the Big Ten like you thought you were potentially going to. You lose in the Big Ten tournament championship game to Illinois, so you don't get anything there. And then you get ousted early to James Madison, and then Chucky leaves and AJ leaves. Like that's tough. That's tough. And we'll see what they can do in the portal to replace them. So you don't want to judge it before they happen. Let me look. They have 4 open scholarships. So I would expect, a wing. I would expect another point guard. I know they're going after UNI transfer Bowen Bourne. They've kind of flirted around with some other bigger names. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, when you lose Chucky, who was one of the best perimeter defenders in the Big Ten last year, and AJ Storr, one of the better wings in the college basketball, who goes to Kansas, you're a loser in the portal thing. The second loser is also Minnesota. I feel like those 2 are the easier ones to know, just because the Elijah Hawkins thing stinks. I feel really bad for Ben Johnson because he's had a different starting point guard every single year of college of his Minnesota tenure, and this was supposed to be the year it was different. He said multiple times he was coming back, and then here it is a week before the portal. Elijah Hawkins enters the transfer portal, but it's not just him that they've lost. Josh Ola Joseph, another constant piece. He transfers out to Cal. Dawson Garcia, they were able to get him back, which was huge. They were able to get Mike Mitchell back, which was huge. But Pharrell Payne was, one of the guys that on that roster. You're like, man, I really like that dude. Like, you don't want to say he's Kofi Coburn 2.0, but there's some Kofi Coburn power, strength, physicality, sheer just bulldozing dudes, and I really liked him. So him going to Texas A&M stinks as well. So I just feel like Minnesota, there's haves and there's have-nots in college basketball, and Minnesota is clearly in that have-nots section, and it sucks for those fans. It really does. I think I can understand the frustration of man, we don't really have a chance just to be even competitive. I just feel like it stinks for Minnesota fans, where it's just you have a team here that you go in and get, and not a ton of people wanted Elijah Hawkins last year, and it was a good find by you, and he has a really good year, and now it's gone. It's just frustrating, just because I feel like you can't really build something sustainable. Now you get Dawson Garcia back, and that's good, and you have a nice recruiting class. Isaac Asuma is a really good freshman that I like. I got to see a lot when I was covering high school preps up there in Minnesota, and then maybe you get Cam Christie back, and that could potentially have the bones of a decent team. But it's like, Tom Izzo literally said that Minnesota could have been first in the Big Ten this year, and that wasn't crazy if they got all of their guys back. And now you don't even have that chance. So it's a tough pill to swallow for Ben Johnson.
Last year, I think we would have counted Michigan State as a loser because they didn't add anybody in the transfer portal. They have added one. Are they still a loser? Are they their third team, or who you got?
They were in the conversation for it. I went with Iowa, though, just because I felt like losing Tony Perkins is a big blow. And their biggest offseason hole that they needed to fill is the 4. And they haven't been able to get that done yet. We'll see how this goes. So they're a loser for now, but they could easily shift here in a little bit because Nana Owusu-Anane was a guy out of Brown that I really liked, and they had him on campus, and they were like, oh, we got a great chance here to be that 4. It's like they were not very athletic and very physical defensively last year in that front court with Ben Creaky there. And Owusu-Anane would have definitely fixed that. And he decided to go back to Brown. He wants that Ivy League degree. So that kind of stings for them. And the next target that they're going after is Matt Cross out of UMass, who I really like. So if they can get that done, they're automatically out of this conversation. But for now, when you lose Tony Perkins and you're not able to fill that biggest hole and you're one of your top targets at the 4 doesn't come in, they're one of the losers just because I feel like there's also a chance that Peyton Sandfort stays in the NBA draft. And now you're looking at Iowa as like, man, like, what's the path here for them to finish even in the top half of a new look Big Ten next year? It would not be very easy unless Josh Dix just takes that superstar jump, which he is potentially capable of doing.
Isaac Trotter, I see a story up now at cbssports.com. It's really cool to see. He writes for 24/7 Sports. You can follow him on Twitter as well. Isaac Trotter, always appreciate the insight, man. We'll catch up soon.
Thanks for having me.